Hello everyone. I I am Jagdish. In the previous video, I talked about how a project starts with a business need. Now, let's assume the MedDRA Automation project has been approved. In my experience, this is where a project manager needs to create clarity before the team starts discussion. I'm going to walk you through how I would structure that project based on the way I have worked with multiple cross-functional teams in my career. I will keep the example generic and avoid confidential project details. Let's start with the project initiation, turning an approved business need into an executable project. Before that, I would start with a inspiring thought. The beginning is the most important part of the work, as this is the quote by Plato. For a project manager, a strong beginning creates clarity for everything that follows. Whenever I think about a project initiation, this Plato comes to my quote from Plato comes to my mind. I have learned that spending time at the beginning to clarify the objective, scope, ownership, and governance saves a lot of confusion later. The project manager lesson for me is simple. Don't rush into execution just because the project has been approved. Now, where are we in the story? In my career, once a project gets approval, I don't consider the work finished at that point. I see initiation bridge as the bridge between the business decision and the detailed delivery plan. My first focus is alignment. Why are we doing this? What are we actually delivering? Who owns what? And how will decision be made? So this is the questions that we are going to ask ourselves. Coming to the what is project initiation? I think of initiation as a creating a common understanding. I want everyone to have the same answer to six questions: why, what, who, boundary, control, and when. Why is the business objective? What is the scope and deliverables? Who is the stakeholders and ownership? Boundaries is the assumptions and constraints. Control is the governance and decisions. When is the high level more roadmap? I have found that when these are unclear, the problems usually show up later as a scope confusion, ownership gaps, and delays or stakeholder conflicts. Project charter. So you would have heard about it. This charter brings the project intent and authority together. When I think about a project charter, I don't see it as just another document. I see it as an agreement that gives the project direction and establishes who is accountable. For a MedDRA automation project, I would want the business purpose or business need or project objective, high level scope, sponsor, major deliverables, success criteria, sponsor and project manager, key stakeholders, high level milestones, assumptions and constraints, initial risk, high level budget, approval and authorization. Key idea is in this and in an interview, I would explain the purpose of the charter rather than simply listing out the fields. I, I I have learned to separate the solution from the objective. If I say implement automation, I am describing what we built. If I say reduce manual effort, I am describing what we built. If I say reduce manual effort and turnaround time while Maintaining quality, I'm describing why the project matters. So that is what the objective should be. It should not be like just implement MedDRA automation. It should be implement MedDRA coding automation capability to reduce the manual effort and turnaround time while maintaining coding quality, consistency, and compliance. The distinction makes the conversation such stronger with the business stakeholders and interviewers. So objective is equal to always the intended outcome, not just the technology. Coming to define scope. Scope is one of the areas where I have learned that clarity early saves a lot of pain later. I want the team and stakeholders to know not only what we are delivering, but also what we are not delivering, that is in scope and out of scope. For example, in scope, in scope, what are the scopes like current project, current state assessment, requirements, solution design, development configuration, integration, testing and validation, UAT, training, deployment, hypercare, business as usual, and over. And coming to the out of scope is unrelated PV process changes, unrelated database enhancements, for other automation opportunities, further enhancement not required for the initial. Exact boundaries should be agreed with the stakeholders. This becomes the foundation for the later planning and change control. Deliverables versus activities. Deliverable, what the project produces. Example, automated meta coding capability, activity, work required to produce it. Example, configure rules, develop integration, test. I make this distinction because later, when we build the WS and schedule, we need to break deliverables into a manageable work. The deliverable is the outcome, and the activities are the work required to produce it. This is one of the connection I would explain to an interviewer to show that how I understand how initiation leads to planning. Like we'll we'll go to the next slide and understand more better. Now, in my experience, project delivery becomes much easier when the right people are involved early. So that is identifying stakeholders, who influences, who decides, who contributes, or is affected by the project. For a pharmacovigilance related change, I would need a combination of business, SME, users, technology, QA assisting, validation, compliance, and leadership. I ask who makes the decision. Don't just list stakeholders. Understand what each person needs, decides, contributes, and cares about. Stakeholder analysis. I don't communicate with every stakeholder in the exactly the same way. A sponsor may want business outcome, risks and decision. A technical lead may need detailed dependencies and blockers. End users need readiness and impact. The power interest view helps me decide how closely to engage with each stakeholder. If it is a high power high interest, I who manage closely, that is sponsor and key business owner. High power, low interest, keep satisfied senior stakeholders. Low power, high interest, keep informed users and SMEs. Low power, low interest, monitor peripheral stakeholders. RACI, clarifying ownership. What is this RACI? One practical lesson from working across teams is that people often assume someone else owns a decision or activity. RACI is a simple way to make that explicit. For example, in a UAT, business may be accountable for acceptance, users, SMEs responsible executing testing. Project manager coordinates the process. Technology is consulted. I use metrics to create clarity, not bureaucracy. R is responsible, who does the work. A is accountable, owns the outcome decision. C is consulted, provides input. I is needs updates. Assumption versus constraints. I treat assumptions as things we are planning to be true, but I don't take them for granted. If an assumption becomes uncertain, I consider whether it needs to be captured as a risk. Constraints are different. They already limit our choices, such as fixed deadline, limited sources, or technology limitations. So, what are the assumptions? Something we believe to be true for planning. Examples: SMEs will be available, test data will be available, required environments will be ready. These are the assumptions. Constraints: something that limits our options. Examples: fixed deadline, limited SMEs, fixed budget, technology limitations. Assumptions becomes false. It may become a risk or a issue. Dependencies. You may have heard this word a lot. A dependency is something the project relies upon. I In cross-functional projects, dependencies are often where delay starts. For example, our testing may depend on an interface, environment, or another team's deliverable. As a project manager, I want to identify the dependency early, confirm who owns it, when when we need it, what happens if it slips, and what mitigation escalation is available. So that is what the example is. UAT depends on system testing completion and environment readiness. As a project manager action, we should identify owner, date needed, impact if delayed, mitigation or escalation. At initiation, I don't expect to know every risk. I want to identify the obvious high level risk. Like, you won't know every risk at initiation, but identify the obvious ones, like requirements uncertainty, technical feasibility, integration dependency, SME availability, data quality, coding accuracy, validation compliance, user adoption, schedule constraints. Risk management is continuous. Register evolves through the project. Then I keep the risk register alive throughout execution. A risk identified today may change as we learn more. Governance, you would have heard a lot about it. How will the project be controlled and decisions be made? Cadence. What is a cadence? Team meetings, project reviews, steering committees, reporting status, rate logs, milestones, budget and schedules, escalation. What gets escalated to whom and when? Decisions. Who approves scope, budget, and major challenges. I have learned that governance should be enough to control the project without becoming unnecessary. Bureaucracy. I would define the meeting cadence, reporting, escalation path, and decision rights based on project size and complexity. For senior stakeholders, I focus on what needs their attention: business outcome, timeline, budget, and decisions. So those are to be presented well to the leadership. At this stage, I would not pretend we have a perfect detailed schedule. I want a high level roadmap that shows major phases and milestones like detailed activities, estimates, resources, and dependencies come during planning. This distinction helps prevent false precisions early in the project. At initiation, keep the roadmap high, high level. Detailed task level planning comes later. After initiation, it's definitely a project kickoff. For me, a kickoff is not just a meeting where everyone is introduced. It is the point where team gets aligned on why the project matters. What are we delivering? Who owns what? The major milestone. How we will work together. A good kickoff reduces ambiguity before detailed execution begins. Kickoff outcome. What can we expect? A shared understanding, ownership, and commitment. So, who, why, what, who, when, and how should be clarified during kickoff meeting. The project manager's role during initiation. If I summarize what I personally see as the project manager role here, it is creating clarity. I facilitate alignment, define boundaries, establish ownership, surface assumption constraints, identify initial risk, set governance, coordinate approvals, prepare for detailed planning. As a project manager mindset, I should create clarity before execution so the team can plan with confidence. The goal is to make the transition into a detailed planning much smoother. Now, coming to the as discuss, these are the interview questions that may come up, like, or I would prepare. But instead of memorizing definitions, I would answer using one of my project example. My structure would be, what was the situation when, what was my project management thinking? What did I do? What was the outcome? That makes the answer sound like experience rather than a theory. Like, what is the project initiation? What is the project charter? How do you define project scope? How do you identify stakeholders? What is RACI? Difference between assumption, constraint, risk, and dependency. What is project governance? What do you do if requirements are unclear? Definitely answer with situation, project manager thinking, action, and outcome. I would like to imagine you are the project manager and the business has approved the MedDRA Automation project. Before development starts, what would you establish? Objective, scope, stakeholders, RACI, assumptions, constraints, dependencies, initial risks, governance, high level roadmap, success criteria, and charter approval. If you can explain these without looking at the slide, you are already building a kind of confidence you need for the project manager interview. Now, let me bring this back to something practical. When I look at the project from my career, I want to explain, I want to be able to answer why are we doing it? What are we delivering? Who owns it? What boundaries and constraints exist? What could affect us? How will we govern it? And what is our high level path? And who approves it? Now, Think about one project from your own career and see if you can answer these questions. That is what I want you to use this series. Not just to learn concepts, but to organize your own experience into a story you confidently explain. Audience, the question would be if you can explain the initiation elements using your own project, you are much closer to answering a real project manager interview question. If an interview takeaway, if an interviewer asks me what I do during project initiation, I would not list just list documents. I would explain that my objective is to create alignment on the business outcome, scope, ownership, governance, assumption, constraints, dependence, and success criteria before detailed planning thoughts. This is the way I think about initiation based on my experience. Next video, we move from clarity to planning, that is, project planning WS, estimation, resource, schedule, and budget.